Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gaffer and Gear. In today's episode, we're going to be having a look at this incredibly small and compact Forza 150, which is a COB light. We're also going to take a look at how it goes with its optional Fresnel and the super small, super lightweight projection mount. Let's take a look. Alright, so before we get underway, a very big thank you to the Australian distributor Protog for getting us the equipment today. Now, a lot of you are probably wondering, Forza 150, why aren't we reviewing the Forza 720 today? Well, the 720 review is on hold for a little bit. We're just waiting a few more weeks so that we can get the 720 daylight, the 720 bicolor, the projection mount with a 19-degree barrel, and the projection mount with a 36-degree barrel, and the Fresnel all in the same place together, so you can get the results and the review on the whole lot as an ecosystem. That'll probably persuade you to buy it more than just me doing a review on this and saying I have no idea how it goes with the projection mount. All right, now let's get into the review of the Forza 150. Now today we're also reviewing the Forza 150 with the optional projection mount and with the Fresnel. So we're covering a lot of information. Now at the end of each chapter will be the technical data, all my spectrometer readings for all of the attachments. So if you want to skip things that don't interest you, in the timeline bar below, there it is chaptered, so you can skip to the next chapter. And also in the description, it's time coded, so you can go to the description below and skip to the sections that interest you. All right, first off, let's go through how much this costs and what you get for your money. Okay, so this kit sells for about 700 Australian dollars or around 500 US dollars. So you get the bag for that. You get your regional power plug. You get the light, of course, which comes with a protective cap. You get the dish, which is a faceted dish. Now you get a Bowen mount adapter. Okay, so one thing to point out, this light is smaller than a Bowen mount. Okay, so that's why it's got its own mount. Now that is actually a good thing because its Fresnel and its projection mount are actually quite good. So that's not actually a negative at all. But it does come with the Bowen mount if you want to use your existing softboxes. Now the Bowen mount here also has an umbrella mount, so which is done up really tight. It also has an umbrella mount, so you can use an umbrella as a soft light source, which is a very quick portable soft light. And you also get a power supply. All right, that's it. Okay, so let's take a look over the light now. So the first thing we'll have a look at is the power inlet, which is a 4-pin XLR DC. Now it says on here 15 to 24 volts. Now if that was correct, it means you wouldn't be able to run this off any of our batteries because our batteries are 14.4 or 14.8 or 26 volt. Now this is incorrect. I haven't tried running it off a 26 volt battery because my connectors won't go to this port on my 26 volt batteries. I've done that on purpose so you can't blow something up by accident. And my 14.8s I ran using a 4-pin XLR2 DTAP connector, which is most likely what you're probably thinking of doing if you want to run this off batteries. So just a few problems I can see with that. Number one, 14.4 or 14.8 volts is your battery. This thing's 150 watt, so you're already exceeding 10 amps. Now most DTAP connectors can't exceed 10 amps. Some can only do 5 amps. The vast majority can only do 10 amps. Very few can do over 10 amps. Now even if your battery is rated for a total output of in excess of 150 watts, doesn't mean that your DTAP connector specifically is. So that is something you need to check up on if you're thinking about going the DTAP option. Now just to make my point, I tested this with a very high capacity battery. This is 310 watt hour, 14.8 volts. Now it ran the light for 1 hour and 20 minutes only at full power. Now at that point, the voltage in the battery has gone down, which pushes the amperage up. And that amperage exceeds the maximum amperage that the DTAP connector can do on the battery. And the safety system, turn the battery off. All right, so let's plug in our DC power and have a look at our other inputs. So we've got a USB port here. Now that USB port is for your firmware updates, but it will also power a lumen radio receiver, which brings us to our next point. The unit has DMX in via a little headphone jack connector, which you need an adapter cable for. Now, the biggest improvement for me over the 60s is the user interface. Now, as someone who owns 60s, I found it incredibly irritating that you'd reach your hand around the back to do an adjustment, something simple like adjusting your brightness, and then you'd end up in the effects menu. So that's not going to happen. So at the moment, I've got it running in the daylight mode. The blue knob controls the brightness, and the black knob does nothing in this mode. So you can't accidentally change your modes or blind yourself with a paparazzi effect. Now, if you want to change your modes, there is a mode button down here. So at the moment, we're in daylight mode. If I press that again, we go into the effects mode. Now, the blue button or the blue knob changes the parameter you've got selected, and the black knob selects the parameter that you want to change. If you press the knob again, you go back into the menu system. So the menu system enables you to select things like your address and your profile selection. So we'll just go back to the normal daylight mode. Now, I'm not going to go through the menu in any detail for the simple reason that I can't match a camera shutter to the refresh rate on the screen at all. Now, in terms of other things I like with the unit, the power in does not interfere with the stirrup, so you can have this pointing straight down. However, if you have a modifier on the front of this and you want to turn the stirrup around, the stirrup has to go over the front, okay, if you want to have it rigged that way. So you have to take your modifier off, but given the weight of the modifiers, that's not a big deal at all. Now, in terms of other things that are improved, this thing has something that no other Nanlite that's come in for review has, and that is what I'd consider to be a very quiet running cooling fan. Now, in addition to that, you can turn the fan off, but it reduces the output to 25% brightness. Now, I can't think of any situation where you'd need to do that because this runs super quiet as it is. The next thing that impresses me with this unit is its ability to retain its values when you dim it. So what I mean by that is its CCT value at 10% is very true to what it was at 100%. Same with its color render scores, and same with its white point accuracy. Not many lights can boast that. The next thing that really impresses me with this unit is the amount of decent optical accessories that you can get for it. You can get a Fresnel that's very good, and you can get a really awesome projection mount. With no modifier on, the light easily has enough spread to light up the inside of any softbox modifier. And using it as a direct light, it has incredibly hard shadows because it's a very small point source. Now, even if you mount the optional bow and mount adapter, you get the same amount of spread. According to my frequency meter, the light is running at 30.4 kilohertz, so it is high-speed flicker-free. At 100% brightness, it is typically pulling 167.9 watts of AC power draw. The maximum power draw recorded over 2 days of testing was 171.7 watt. At a distance of 1 meter with no modifier on, the light comes in at 5,331 lux, which works out at 400 ISO to f11 and 5/10. At a distance of 3 meters with no modifier on, it measured 800 lux, which at 400 ISO works out at f4 and 7/10. At 100% brightness with no modifier, I got 5,566 Kelvin, with an SSI score of 74. The TM30 color test results were 93% average color accuracy with an average 100% saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point of the light came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0021, which puts it in that safe zone just above the Planckian curve and just below the daylight curve. At 50% brightness with no modifier, I got 5,569 Kelvin with an SSI of 73. The TM30 color vector results came in at an average 93% color accuracy with an average 100% saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0021, which puts it in that safe zone between the Planckian curve and the daylight curve. At 10% brightness with no modifier on, I got 5,555 Kelvin with an SSI score of 72. TM30 color vector testing came in with a 93% average color accuracy and an average 100% color saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0023, which puts it above the Planckian curve, but below the daylight curve. All right, let's take a quick look at the unit with the dish on, and it is a faceted reflector, so it's got all of these little surfaces to increase the light output. Now I've got this set up at a distance of 2.5 meters away from the wall, and I've got a light stand in between the wall and the light so you can have a look at the shadow quality. So I'm just going to pan it around so you can see how even or uneven it is, depending on if your glass half empty or glass half full. Right now, with all dishes, the shadow qualities are pretty yuck. So this is pretty much the same. Dishes are just for increasing your light output. Now there is one difference between the Forza 150 and the Forza 60s with this dish on. With the Forza 60s, there was a distance away from your subject. I think it was somewhere around the 180 centimeters to 2 meter range, where at that distance you would see all of the rings on the dish. That doesn't seem to happen on this 150 because it's got a slightly bigger COB. So when I move it around in that range, you don't seem to get that. Oh, there it is, just a little bit, but it's nowhere near as bad. So if you do find that, just move it back a little bit and it will even the beam out. With the dish on at a distance of 3 meters, I got 2,480 lux, which at 400 ISO works out to f8 and 3/10. The CCT came in at 5,409 Kelvin with an SSI of 73. The TM30 colour vector testing came in at 93% average colour accuracy with an average 99% colour saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in at plus 0.0044, which is off the Planckian curve to about a 1/4 green gel equivalent, and up from the daylight curve at less than a 1/8 correction gel. All right, so let's have a look at this now when it's paired up with the optional Nanlite FL11, which is their Fresnel. Now this is mine. I own 4 of these, and I bought the 4 of them to use with the Nanlite 60. All right, so when you're putting this on, there's a release latch at the top here. Now that latch can catch to the lip on the Fresnel. So when you're putting it on, just make sure that you definitely hear it lock. Okay, and I'd suggest spotting it up just a tad, just to make sure that that lock there is not caught under the lip and it actually pops up. Otherwise, it can come off. Okay, so just a little warning there. Now, if you own these Fresnels and you're using them on the 60 or even the 60 bicolor, chances are you're reasonably impressed with the quality of optics that you're getting. So I'm just going to give you a quick warning. This is very good on the 150, but it's not as good as it is on the 60. The shadows aren't quite as sharp. All right, so let's take a look. Now the shadows, they're pretty good for a Fresnel. It's pretty reasonable, but there is a distinct little bit of double shadowing there, or softer edges than you get with the 60. So look, it is good, but it's not as fantastic as it is on the 60. Now in terms of the barn door cuts, you get pretty good barn door cut, pretty good reasonable barn door control. Now the barn door cuts are not as sharp as if you're using it with the 60, but looking here, it's not too bad. Now you probably won't see it on camera, I suspect, but by eye, when I'm looking at it, I can see on the end of the beam, I can make out the Fresnel rings ever so slightly, which I can't make out when I'm using this with the 60. Now in terms of the flood spot, it still has a very good flood spot even when used with this light that has a slightly bigger COB. So let's have a look at how that goes. Now packed down with the Fresnel attached, it's a very compact, very lightweight unit. And to me, it does feel brighter than the old school 200 watt HMIs if you're an older gaffer and you want a gauge of how bright it is. Now the combination of the Fresnel with this unit does give some very good results on the spectrometer. Let's take a look. With the Fresnel mounted at a distance of 3 meters in full flood, I got 1,980 lux, which metered at 400 ISO gave me f5.6 and 9/10. With the Fresnel in full spot at a distance of 3 meters, I got 7,610 lux, which meters in at 400 ISO at f11 and 9/10. The CCT came in at 5,637 Kelvin. The SSI came in at 74. The TM30 colour vector scores were 93% average colour accuracy with an average 100% colour saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0014, which puts it in that safe middle ground above the Planckian curve and below the daylight curve. Now initially when Forza came out with the 150, I couldn't see the point in them at all. I sort of wondered, why would you buy a 150 when you can buy the 200? And then I found out it fits their smaller mounts. So what got me excited about that is the projection mount here. So I own 2 of these projection mounts, which I bought to use with the Forza 60s. Now these projection mounts are compatible with the 150, so that got me really excited. And here's why. These projection mounts with the Forza 60s really changed the way that I do backlighting or kick or scratch lighting. So prior to having a light this lightweight, and to give you an idea, the projection mount, even with the 150 on it, is light enough that you could put it on a C-stand arm or a boom arm and use it as a backlight. Prior to having this, I didn't really have fine control over my backlights. So for example, because this has got so much control on it, I can use it to say light someone's shoulders, for example, use it as a shoulder light, but not light their hair or their head. It really does have that fine amount of control. And if you defocus it backwards, it's got very minimal chromatic aberration. There's almost none there. I mean, I'm standing right next to it and I can't see it. So that's why I haven't used projection mounts in the past as backlights or kickers or scratch, because you get that color frame that really stands out. Now, where I also use these is if, say, we're filming somebody who's got a light colored shirt on, but they've got dark hair, and you need to get their hair to stand out from the background. So I've been using the projection mounts for that, so I can light up their hair, get their hair nicely backlit, but not have too much light on the shoulders. So this projection mount with the 60s has been a big change for me in terms of how I do things. Now I got really excited when the 150 came out because that's even more brightness plus DMX control. Now where I've also been using these mounts is if I've got a big wide shot and I need to get a kick or a scratch. Now with the 60 running off a V-mount battery, I could pick it up and move it into position, and because I've got the 19-degree barrel, really get some concentrated light out. So I could backlight somebody or give them a kick or a scratch, but I had enough control over the beam that I wouldn't flare the camera lens. So it's been really super handy for that. Now in this setup here, I'm using the Forza 60 with the 19-degree barrel to light up the black controller. And as you can see here, there's no noticeable color fraying on the edge of the beam. Now initially when I found out the 150 was available for this, my first concern was, would the projections be sharp? Because the 150 has a bigger COB than the 60 does. So the bigger your light source, the softer your shadows are. Now initially when I put a gobo in, I was devastated by this. Now I'm going to put the gobo in what you consider to be the correct way around. So the slot down here lines up with the slot inside. Now when you do this, you can't get a uniformed focus. You can see the focus drifts through the gobo. You cannot get everything in focus. That's, to me, not an acceptable focus. But I then tried, mostly out of desperation, turning the gobo around and putting it the wrong way around in the slot. So now it's further away from the COB. Now I can get what I consider to be an acceptable focus across the gobo. So I was really surprised by that, but it does come at a cost. Because the gobo is now further away from your cutter blades, you cannot get the gobo in focus with a cut that is anywhere near in focus. Let's try that. So there's a huge focal plane difference between the blades and the gobo. Now the gobo projection isn't perfect. There is a slight bit of color fringing there, but you'd have to be pretty happy for the cost. And the focus, well, it's not perfectly universal, but I think it's more than acceptable. With the projection mount and the 19-degree barrel at a distance of 3 meters, I got 5,820 lux, which at 400 ISO works out to F11 and 5/10. The CCT came in at 5,224 Kelvin, which puts it off 5,600 Kelvin by about a 1/8 CTB. The SSI came in at 74. The TM30 colour vector testing came in at 93% average colour accuracy with an average 100% colour saturation. Here are the CRI scores, and R9 and R12 are below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the white point comes in at a delta UV of plus 0.0034, which puts it a little bit more than a 1/8 correction gel off the Planckian curve towards green, but sits it beautifully on the daylight curve. Okay, let's go over the DMX on this unit. And the DMX is rock solid and dependable once you get it working. Now, that sounds very negative, and it is. This is another frustrating example from Nanlite of them sending me a product that hasn't been thoroughly beta tested before being released. Now, in terms of the light being rock solid, once you've got your DMX address set, you could leave this in a studio lighting grid, come back the next morning, turn the power back on. It will remember your DMX settings, it'll remember your DMX address, your profile, and it will respond to your desk correctly. All right, so the first thing you're going to need is a DMX adapter cable. So that's got a headphone jack at this end and two 5-pin XLRs. Now, what can catch you out here is it's got a thread, so you can't accidentally disconnect the cable from the light, but you can actually disconnect the connection. So let's take a look. So here I've got the connector plugged in, I've got it screwed, but it's not going to come out of the light, but I can disconnect the connection. So have a listen. So I've disconnected it from the connection inside, and I've reconnected it. So just make sure you're pushed all the way in, otherwise you're going to be trying to find a fault that doesn't exist. All right, now if you want to run a Lumen radio receiver, you can power that off the USB port, so that's a very big plus. Now at this point, I strongly suggest do not plug in your DMX if you haven't set your DMX address yet, okay? If you plug in your DMX, it might limit your ability to select your DMX channel. The next thing I'd suggest at this point is to turn your brightness off, okay? So I'm just going to explain why you want to turn your brightness off. In order to get into the menu where you select your DMX address and your DMX profile, you have to scroll through the modes. So we are currently in the daylight mode. The next mode is your special effects mode, and then after that is your menu mode. So when I scroll through to get to the menu, we turn on a special effect. Okay, so that's why I suggest having the brightness turned down before you try to select your DMX address. Otherwise, you could end up blinding your crew with a paparazzi effect or a strobe effect or something like that. All right, now we hit the next problem. I've got my channel selection for my DMX. Now with this light, if you go to change your channel and it hits an address which has a value greater than 0 on it, or a command going through to another light, this light will automatically lock to that address and stop you from being able to select another address number. So that's why I suggest having your DMX disconnected before you try to select your DMX address. Now with no DMX signal going through, or your DMX channels all being set to a 0 value or blacked out, you can select your DMX address. Now I've got my DMX address selected in the menu. If I scroll down the menu options, I will find DMX mode. Now you've got a choice of daylight mode, which is a 2-channel mode. Channel 1 selects your brightness, and channel 2 selects your fan on off. The other option you've got is ultimate mode. So in ultimate mode, you can select your brightness. The next channel selects whether you're in effects mode or in daylight mode, and then the other channels, you can select your effect and your effect parameters. So for the moment, I'm just going to have it running in the daylight mode and running off DMX channel 10, which is what I've got my controller set to. All right, let's plug in the DMX, but I'd suggest not doing it at this point, but I'm going to show you the next problem. Okay, now I've got my DMX connected, I've got a signal running through. Now at this point, one of two things is going to happen. I'm going to have no DMX control, or I'm going to have control over my brightness and my fan, but the effect that we manually scroll past in the menu is still going to be running. So let's have a look. Okay, so I've got brightness control and I've got fan control, which is what is in my profile, but it's still running this effect, which is not what I want. So at this point, I would suggest, or to get around this, you go into the menu system, you go into the manual daylight mode, okay, and then send a fresh DMX command down the line. Now this will get it into DMX mode. It'll get everything locked and everything working. Now, once you get to this stage, once you get everything working, the DMX does have a lot of smoothing on it. So if you're operating it manually by finger, you're not going to get any pulsing or any shimmering, but there is a massive delay. All right, let's start testing the DMX, and I'll just explain what I've got set up here. I've got the Forza 150 running off a Lumen radio receiver set to an 8-bit profile. Now, regardless of whether I'm running from the Lumen radio receiver or hardwired, I seem to get the same response. Now, to give you something to compare it to, I have a Titan tube running off CRMX with an 8-bit profile. I'm using the Titan tube as a comparison because I believe these are the most responsive lights to DMX that I own. Both lights are running off a linear dimmer curve and receiving their commands at the same time. Let's start the testing with instant on-off commands. Now let's have a look at a 5-second automated fade to black starting now. Five-second fade up starting now. Again, a 5-second fade to black starting now. Five-second fade up starting now. Now let's do the same test, but this time with a 2.5-second programmed fade to black starting now. Fading up starting now. Now let's do a 1-second automated fade to black starting now. And a fade up starting now. Fade down starting now. Fade up starting now. Now let's do some 1/2-second fade ups and fade downs. All right, so that's the Nanlite 150 reviewed, and just a personal note from me, if it didn't have this projection mount, I would pretty much have no interest in this light. With this projection mount, this really fills a niche for me. It's a very small compact projection unit that is lightweight enough that I can rig it, say on a boom arm as a backlight, and it has DMX and plenty of firepower. So that's a niche that nothing else seems to fill at the moment. The only thing that's going to stop me from rushing out and buying these now is I'd like to see how the bicolor version goes through the projection mount first before I drop any coin. All right, next episode will be a bit of a follow-up. So I'm going to have a look at the 36-degree barrel. So this arrived recently for me to review. Now they wanted to do this at the same time as this, but I figure this needs its own separate review so you can see how it goes with the 150 and with the 60 optically. And they've also given me the iris, so we can have a look at how the iris goes in the projection mount. So that'll be the next episode. And then after that will be the review of the, what have I got there? The LED Zip Punch, which is a 350 watt bicolor matte light. So the difference between that and other matte lights is without the diffusion, it actually has spot LED lenses. So that's becoming a bit of a trend. All right, thank you everyone for watching. See you on the next episode of Gaffer and Gear.